Today in Madden, I'm going to be fixing every team's biggest problem. Like for example, the Bengals have a really bad O-line, so I'm going to increase all of their O-linemen overall by 10. We're going to first start off with the Chicago Bears. They have a pretty bad O-line, but last year the Chicago Bears had the least amount of sacks, and their D-line in Madden is pretty trash. So we're going to increase their entire D-line by 10. Hopefully with their new D-line, this will help them out. Next up is the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, all around, they are a very good team. I think they have the best receiver core in the NFL. They have an amazing quarterback, an amazing, very good running back. Joe Burrow has been sacked 135 times in his entire NFL career. We're going to be giving all of their O-linemen +5 to their overall. Now, hopefully this Bengals offense can be a lot more dominant. Now it is time for the Buffalo Bills. Now, this team doesn't really have that many problems. I think their biggest problem is their middle linebacker and left outside linebacker. We're going to give Bernard and Williams +20 to their overall. Now, hopefully this defense can forget about Tremaine Edmonds. And let's move on to the next team. Next up is the Denver Broncos. Now, this team doesn't have that many problems, actually. Their O-line is pretty good. Now, I think the biggest problem is their defense, mainly their cornerbacks, except Patrick Surtain. So we're going to give all of their cornerbacks, except Patrick Surtain, a +10 to their overall. All of their cornerbacks are now above an 80 overall, and hopefully this defense can perform better and won't lose by 50. Next up is the Cleveland Browns, and this team doesn't have any problems on offense. It is nothing but a perfect roster. And honestly, the same on defense. You have very young cornerbacks, and I think this is a team that really doesn't have any problems. And the same on defense. You have really young cornerbacks. You have a almost 99 overall right end. So since the Cleveland Browns do not have a problem, we're just going to move on to the next team. Next up is the Buccaneers, and they have a ton of problems. Their O-line is an example, and they have Baker Mayfield as their quarterback. Ew. But their defense is actually really good. You got an X factor. Pretty good cornerbacks. I think their biggest problem is their O-line, because Baker Mayfield should not be making throws like this. So we're going to give everyone +10 to their overall, besides Tristan Wirfs. This Bucs O-line definitely looks a lot better. Alright, next up is the Cardinals, and this team has multiple problems. They only have two good wide receivers, Marquise Brown and Rondale Moore. And then you got Joshua Dobbs as your starter because Kyler Murray is hurt. Now, their O-line is actually not as bad as it should be, but their defense is absolutely horrible. Their number one cornerback is a 74. They don't have one guy above a 75 overall on their D-line. To help this team out just a little bit, I'm gonna give their entire O-line +10. I'm gonna give their 4 cornerbacks and their entire D-line a +10 as well. After updating this team's O-line and their cornerbacks and their D-line, this team is up to an 82 overall, and they were a 77 before, so this definitely is going to help out this team a lot. Now, next up is the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, this team doesn't have any problems. They have the best O-line in the game, an amazing quarterback, an amazing halfback, and their defense is actually really good. The only problem with this team is definitely their receivers. When Kadarius Toney is your number one receiver,
you got problems!
So we're going to give 4 of their receivers +5 to their overall. I think this team is about to go win another Super Bowl, but let's move on to the next. Next up is the Indianapolis Colts, who have a couple of problems. Their cornerbacks aren't that good. Something I did notice, though, is that their wide receivers are actually pretty bad. So I'm going to give all of them +5 to their overall, including Michael Pittman. And hopefully this could help the Indianapolis Colts win some games. And hopefully after giving their receivers +5 to their overall, they can perform a little bit better. Next up is the Commanders, who actually have a really good team in Madden. You have Terry McLaurin. You have a great receiver core, a very young quarterback. The only problem is their O-line. So we're going to go ahead and give everyone +5. And we're also going to give their tight end +5 to his overall too, since he is a 66. I mean, they easily have one of the best defenses in the game. After upgrading this team, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Next up are the Dallas Cowboys, who don't have any problems on offense or on defense, so we're just going to go ahead and move on to the next team. Next up are the Miami Dolphins, who are one of the best teams in the NFL this year. I mean, they have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. A-Chan has been going crazy. I think their only issue is a tight end, so we're going to give him plus 10 to his overall. Next up are the Eagles, who don't have a single problem. I mean, this team is absolutely crazy. They have one of the better They have one of the better defenses in the league. Next up is the Atlanta Falcons, who I think their only problem is their receiver core. I mean, they don't have a single guy over an 85 overall. So we're going to give all of their receivers a plus 10. This offense looks a lot more better with their receivers being upgraded. You would think that the 49ers wouldn't have any issues, but their O-line is actually a massive issue in this game. I mean, they only have one guy over the 80s, and that's Trent Williams, who is a 98. So we're going to give everyone plus 10. This 49ers offense is even more dominant now with a better O-line. Next up is the New York Giants, who have a lot of problems. I think their biggest problem is their O-line, besides Andrew Thomas. I think Daniel Jones is honestly carrying this team on his back. This team got sacked 11 times in the Seahawks game. So we're going to give everyone on their O-line plus 10 to their overall. This team looks so much better with a better O-line, and hopefully they won't get sacked 11 times in a game again. Next up is the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I think their biggest problem is their O-line. On their defense, I didn't find any problems. Everyone on their O-line is going to get plus 10 to their overall. After their upgrades, I think the Jacksonville Jaguars have one of the best O-lines in the game. Next up is the New York Jets, and I think the only issue that they have is some issues on their O-line. So I'm going to give everyone on their O-line plus 5. The Jets O-line definitely looks a lot better. Next up are the Detroit Lions, and this team is honestly excellent. I mean, they have probably the best O-line in the game, an amazing number 1 wide receiver, a pretty good running back, a pretty good quarterback. Now, the flaw on defense is probably their D-line, except Aiden Hutchinson. So we're going to give these two guys plus 10 to their overall. Now, hopefully these guys can help Aiden Hutchinson and he doesn't have to do all the work. Next up is the Green Bay Packers, and the biggest problem for this team is probably the receivers. The Packers actually have a really, really good defense. We're going to give plus 10 to their wide receivers, and hopefully that can help Jordan Love out. Now, hopefully with a better receiver core, this could help Jordan Love out and he doesn't have to make insane throws. Now, hopefully with this new receiver core, this can help out Jordan Love. Alright, next up is the Carolina Panthers, and I was thinking about doing their wide receiver core, but their wide receiver core is not as bad as their O-line, man. This is a very bad O-line, so we're going to give plus 10 to everyone on this O-line, and hopefully that can help Bryce Young out. And hopefully this brand new O-line can help Bryce Young out with his development. Alright, next up is the New England Patriots, and this team is alright, I guess. I mean, their receivers aren't that great, but I think the bigger problem they have is a quarterback. I mean, Mac Jones has just been playing horrible. We're going to give Mac Jones plus 5 to his overall and see if that can help him. Alright, hopefully Mac Jones will be able to throw the ball a little bit better than Juju Smith-Schuster. Next up is the Las Vegas Raiders, and this team doesn't have that many issues besides their O-line. I mean, their defense is actually pretty good in this game. Everyone on their O-line except Miller will be getting plus 10 to their overall. Now, hopefully the Las Vegas Raiders can make the playoffs with their brand new O-line. Next up is most likely the worst team in the NFL. Now, in Madden, on the offensive side, they don't really have that many problems. I mean, you got 96 overall Cooper Kupp are on defense. I mean, they have a ton of problems on defense. If Aaron Donald wasn't here, then I think their biggest problem would probably be their O-line. I think their biggest problem is their linebacker. We're going to give all of these linebackers plus 10 to their overall. Now, hopefully with the Rams, brand new linebackers, hopefully they can cover some wide receivers, running backs, tight ends. Next up is the Baltimore Ravens, and this team doesn't have any problems actually. They have a very good O-line, an amazing tight end. They have a quarterback who can run and throw the ball, and their receivers are actually pretty decent. But this team has one problem. Lamar Jackson keeps getting hurt, so we're going to go ahead and give him 99 injury. So hopefully the Ravens can make a good playoff run with Lamar Jackson. Now, next up is the Saints. And this team, and I saw that this team doesn't really have that many problems. I think the only problem that they have is tight end, a 75. So we're going to give their tight end plus 10 to his overall. Now, hopefully with a better tight end, Derek Carr can have more options. Next up is the Seahawks, and this team is actually great in Madden. They have one of the best receiver cores in the entire game. I think the only problem is their O-line. They got a couple guys, so we're going to give everyone on their O-line plus 5 to their overall. Now, even with a better O-line, this offense is even more dominant now. Next up is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and this team doesn't have that many problems. You could argue that their receivers are okay. You could argue that the receivers are pretty bad. They kind of have a similar O-line to what the Seahawks had before. There are no problems with this team, so we're just going to move on to the next guy. Last year, the Houston Texans were the worst team in the NFL. Even though the Bears finished at the bottom of the league, that they gave up the #1 pick just to try and redeem themselves. But this year, things are honestly kind of looking different for them. Now, in Madden, this team actually has a decent O-line. You know, their center is pretty bad, but other than him, he's alright. And their defense isn't even that bad. I mean, you could argue that their corners are pretty bad. I feel like the receivers they have is really affecting how CJ Stroud is going to develop in the future. So we're going to give all of their receivers plus 10 to their overall, and hopefully that can help CJ Stroud. Now, hopefully with a better receiver core, this can help CJ Stroud develop. Next up is the Tennessee Titans, who are pretty bad. I mean, their only good receiver is DeAndre Hopkins, and they also depend on Derrick Henry a lot in real life. But in Madden, their defense is actually pretty good. I think their biggest flaw is their O-line. I mean, you cannot have a 58 overall at right guard. So we're going to give everyone on their O-line plus 10 to their overall, and hopefully that can help. Now, hopefully with a better O-line, Ryan Tannehill can make more passes to DeAndre Hopkins. And finally, we have made it to the final team, the Minnesota Vikings. Now after taking a quick look at this team, they don't have really any problems. The only problem I saw with the Minnesota Vikings is their running back. Alexander Mattison has been playing great in real life. It's just that his overall in Madden is a 76. We're going to give Alexander Mattison plus 10 to his overall, and hopefully the Minnesota Vikings won't have such bad luck in the playoffs. Alright, and I have fixed every team's biggest problem. Now we're going to go ahead and sim to the playoffs and see what teams did good. Here is a look at the playoff bracket. Buffalo, with better linebackers, was able to get the #1 seed. And the Atlanta Falcons, with better wide receivers, got the NFC #1 seed. The Houston Texans, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Cleveland Browns all move on. The 49ers, the Saints, and the Eagles all move on. Now let's go ahead and move on to the AFC and NFC Championship to see who can win. And the #1 seed, Atlanta Falcons, get eliminated. And the Buffalo Bills are moving on to the AFC Championship along with the Texans. And no way, the Houston Texans, with better wide receivers, makes the Super Bowl along with the 49ers with a better O-line. Now let's go ahead and see who will win. And the Houston Texans win the Super Bowl. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace out.